A good business and a sellable business are not the same thing. And that's where a lot of owners get caught out. Because what feels like a strong, successful business on the inside can look risky, dependent, or simply not transferable to a buyer. And the gap between those two views? That's where value gets lost. Today we're talking about that gap. What actually makes a business sellable and why so many leaders only realize too late that they don't have it. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to have you back here today. I'm very excited about my guest today because we actually have a lot in common or crossed paths in many things in our career by the looks of things. Today, I'm joined by Laurie Barkman, and we are going to talk all things transitions, exits, merger and acquisitions, those kind of changes. And I'm very excited that it's Laurie specifically who's coming to talk to us on the podcast about that today, because she is the person to talk about this. She is a recognized growth strategist. She's a speaker and a CEO, and she works specifically with engineering, architecture, and design services firms. Well, you all know I'm an engineer, so that's a good thing for me anyway. And she's also the founder of the Business Transition Sherpa and the author of the Business Transition Handbook. She's a certified exit planner, so that's another thing where we're crossing paths. An M&A advisor and a former 100 million CEO who led a company through successful acquisition by a Fortune 50 company. So she brings real-world leadership and transition expertise to this conversation. Laurie is based in Pittsburgh, so that's a strike three, I think, in terms of where we've crossed paths. I'm so happy you're here, Laurie. There's probably more to you that I didn't mention, but we'll get into the conversation. Welcome.
Thanks so much. That was a wonderful intro. Appreciate you. Yeah, glad to be here.
So, Laurie, in my space, right, exits, mergers usually are born from not the best reasons, right? Coming out of turmoil, some kind of emergency, or I come in because they are starting to fall apart. From the specific space in which you're operating, can you tell us a little bit about where these exits or mergers and acquisitions originate from, what you see as the drivers for these things to happen?
Definitely two categories. The first category are people who, from an age and life stage, are just ready. They're burned out. They come and they say, I want to sell my business within the next, 12 months, 18 months, whatever it is. If somebody says, even if they said 3 years, to me, I would put them in this category where they basically want to sell. They don't want to do something, right? They don't have a lot of time to make changes in the business. They probably don't have a lot of wherewithal to make changes. They have what they have. So that's the first category. The second category are people who are looking ahead, probably 5, 7, 10 years maybe. And they're saying, okay, based on my age and life stage, and based on what I'm seeing in the baby boomer category of folks, I don't want to do it the way they're doing it. I'm not going to die at my desk. I want to be more proactive and intentional. Help me get there.
Yeah, so I definitely recognize that first category, right? And the challenge is that none of these things happen fast. So if somebody is looking at today, or as you're saying, anybody's looking at even 3 years, well, it will take as a minimum a good, 18 months at least. And that's one that's probably smooth sailing to get anywhere. You alluded a little bit in describing that first category as the group of people who basically sell what they have, right? Or are what they have is what's going to go. They're not going to do significantly more work. Can you talk a little bit about how in this day and age with a fast moving economy and a lot of tools and tricks to everyone's disposal, that may not be a very realistic scenario to try and sell your business and not wanting to do anything about it before you put it out there?
I don't know that it's realistic or not realistic. And in some cases, it is what it is. I mean, so for example, if you have a cement business and you have what you have, right? You're in your 70s and your contracts are not contracts, they're handshake deals. You're probably not going to go back to the big institutions where you have longstanding relationships and say, hey, all of a sudden, let's do a master services agreement. They're in their 70s and they're also looking to wind down. So that's a real example. They don't have the ability or the interest or the desire to make changes. The business is what it is. Yeah. And in that case, my guess is that they'll probably close. I don't think that there's a lot of transferable assets there. In other cases where an owner might have the ability to go back, let's say they have some time on their hands, or to really understand what assets they have and whether those assets are transferable and valuable and interesting to a potential buyer, and go through that assessment. If they have some time on their hands and then they're understanding, okay, we've identified some potential gaps and risks, we need to prioritize those and then we can address them accordingly. So sticking on the idea of transferable contracts, it's possible that if we have contracts versus if we don't, right, we can address either one of those cases. But let's say we do, and we need to read them. We need to read the clauses. Are they transferable to other parties or not? And if not, it's not in the language of the contract, but there's other stipulations. All right, that's fine. We can work through that, right? If you're a buyer, that buyers might perceive it as a risk. How would you mitigate that risk? And it's just a trickle effect of, well, what is the issue? What might we do about it? Is it in our control, or could we address it in the future by either the type of transaction, either an entity sale or an asset sale would be one example, or if there's things in between that we can change future contracts so that we start, stop the issue in its tracks from future contracts. All things can be addressed with time, money, and resources. Yeah. When we're out of time, we're out of money, or out of resources, then that's why I'm saying we have what we have.
Yeah, and I love actually that pushback that you said, right? There is also this scenario where it simply maybe is facing that truth that if your business is what it is and we're out of time and money, then that is it. And the reason I bring this up, because in my experience, that then leads to some difficult conversations, right? And maybe that's sometimes or a reality check for some of the parties involved. Because it can be intriguing how different people view at what the value of a business truly is, right? And you started alluding a little bit around quantification and simply going through the steps of checking what you have, checking what's there, and checking how transferable any of these things are and what may have value. Taking that towards success, right? Because you've done a lot of work in that space. What to you are some of the basic ingredients to make a transition, or to make an exit, or to make a merger from the business owner side, the selling or the exiting party? What are some of the ingredients that definitely can contribute to success? Well,
there's, I think, 3 fundamental pillars: personal, financial, and business. And we can touch on each of them. On the personal side, if we are able to enjoy our future state in some vision that's different than what it is today, can we articulate what that is? Can we paint a picture? How much time in the future is it? What does it look like, feel like? What are we doing? How are we spending our time? Who are we with? A lot of business owners have not thought about it. And I believe it's one of the root cause issues of why we're can kicking. We're not working on this proactively because we don't feel good about it. We just feel uncertain. Maybe change and transition has a negative connotation versus an excitement or something that's pulling us forward to our next thing. And so that's a lot of times where I start with my clients, is getting an excitement around, well, what could be for them personally. Sometimes we have to pay attention to the things that could hold us back, and maybe we're not really aware of it, like our identity. Are most of our relationships, our work relationships, if we have a party, are we inviting mostly work people, or are we having relationships with our family and friends that are outside the business. So that's just one indicator. Another indicator might be, look, are you going on vacation? Are you actually unplugging? Are you not able to do that? You're not even going on vacation. Yeah. And then what are the other things in your life that are just making it seem like, oh, I don't know, I just feel really overwhelmed with all of this. Yeah. So that's the personal side. We could probably spend an hour just on that.
Yeah. And then before we go to your other two points, I think the personal, I see it at all scales, right? I also see it where, because I think some of the scenarios where you're talking about is the owner, founder, who's the main person running the business, right? And then people can kind of imagine that the personal life and the business life is that entangled. But I see transactions fail also where the C-suite does not have significant equity, right? Will make some money off the deal, but is really, but has in that business for a long time. How personally you tied to the business or how long you've been tied to the business is not necessarily an indicator how attached to the individual that can be. And it's intriguing, the stickiness, particularly when some of these deals are kind of driven by others, right? Partners saying, I want you to finally retire, or other partners in the business saying it's the right time to move on to do this. We want to go in different directions. But then the people in the business needing to help execute and deal with this exit and not being quite at the same level of readiness, right? It's pervasive everywhere. And it's I'm not sure if I'm entirely explaining this right, but it's not necessarily directly proportionally attached to how personally ingrained somebody is in the business from an outside perspective. I think
there's a lot of legs and tentacles. I think if your identity is the business, well, how likely are you going to want to separate and not have an identity anymore? It just feels uncomfortable. It feels negative. It feels like something to dread, right? It feels just like a negative thing as opposed to a positive thing. So that was my first encouragement. To your point, readiness can be you personally. It could be the organization. So how much owner dependence do we have that poses risk to a transition to, of course, to a buyer, which translates to discount or no sale. If we have a team in place, that's great. Sometimes I've seen, you brought up partners. That's an interesting point because sometimes I see where one partner is older, right? Maybe they're a baby boomer or they're a Gen Xer. And then the younger partner, a millennial, is unaware of the other partner's intentions to retire. So that conversation needs to happen because the transition options need to be presented. Is it a management buyout? Is it a ESOP? Again, circumstances need to be in place here. But let's just say, for example, that these are the options: third-party sale, internal buyout from management team, or an ESOP, as three sort of common things to look at. How do we have that conversation? It's a delicate conversation because maybe the millennial thought, oh, he's going to be here another 10 years. Well, no, he's not, because he's burned out and he wants to do something different. And it's really, really important to be clear about what it is that you want, be mindful of the partner and how to make a win-win, and go from there.
Yeah. And then I think there's also a challenge around what trying to sometimes then match the personal timing up to the market timing, right? Especially if there's several people involved in the ownership of the business. And there are some people for whom this change or this exit is not the end of their career, but is actually a through start or a transition to a next career or a next phase, then the timing of an exit or a merger, and how well that's timed with how the market is operating matters probably a lot more than if it's driven by personal circumstance or, driven by health or age, or where the timing is no longer really your choosing, huh?
I think so. It can be really detrimental to employees, customers, community stakeholders when there's a crisis in the business, like if the owner dies and there's no succession plan and, the spouse has to step in and run things and then they don't know what they're doing. And then everybody lose confidence. And that turns into a downward spiral very, very quickly. That can happen. So I think that it's good to be proactive. And just like you're going to protect your house and your car, you're going to buy insurance for that. There's mechanisms to help protect the transition in an emergency, or we say a contingency succession plan. So I do advocate for that as well, that companies should really have those things in place if they care about the continuity of the business to run, if they're no longer able to serve in the same capacity.
Yeah. And, so can we talk about some of the other success factors, though? Because I know I interrupted you about those. So what else is there that really makes a difference in getting to a successful transition?
Well, the second one I had talked about was financial readiness for the owner. And so this is a bit of math, right? We have to understand, what is the business worth today? What do we need it to be worth in a net proceeds, not just the gross, what do you sell it for, but what's the net proceeds impact for you and your partners? And, considering if there's debt to be paid off and, what ownership percentages are in place, what is your net? And then how does that fit in with your bigger picture in your financial planning? So as a business grows in potential asset value over time, it can become as large as 80-90% of our total net worth picture. When we were a startup, not so much, right? It wasn't a lot of value, but over time, it's really gotten hopefully a lot larger. So I've created a kind of a template for how to look at that as a work back plan. And also, considering the bigger picture of your assets, your liabilities, your future, how long do we think we're going to live kind of idea, the potential withdrawal on that. What is the number that we need to fill the gap? And if our business is not able to hit that target today, then how much time do we have to close that gap? That's a lot of math. Okay. It's not an easy thing to do. And like I said, I've created a template for it and I make it available in a variety of ways, but it's a very important conversation to have with people like myself or with you, financial advisors, et cetera, who can help connect the dots. So that's really, the crux of the financial. There's many other pieces that could go into that bucket, but I think that's kind of the tip of the spear.
Yeah. And I think that on the financial side, I think the opinions can diverge and the advice you get can diverge very drastically. And what is possible to me also feels very situation dependent, because there is no doubt a value gap typically, right? So there is things that you can do, realizing what you would want to make or should make and what an outsider might value your business at. There is things you can do to close that gap. And there is typically some low hanging fruit, right? That is a bit of cleanup. It's like staging your house, right? If you're selling a house, we all know that patching up some of the holes and some of the eyesores or stuff that's for sure going to show up at an inspection, and want to try and hide that, right? And so there's some stuff you can do. But then you get into the next bracket of things. And then I think really having the conversation about the appetite to do that versus the value it will render. And also showing that some of these activities, how much value they all add is dependent on with how much energy you do them and how well you do them. And even if you do them and implement them, and then immediately try to proclaim that they now have value because you fixed this, that, the other, people might say, well, I would like to see the runtime of some of this, right? And to actually see the effects then it can get quite subjective. And so the advice can be very, I would say, contradictory in terms of whether you should do some of the work, whether you want it. What are some of the things that you think business owners and leaders should think about in that space, or some of the questions to ask themselves to how much of that work do they bite off, and where do you see the struggle in that?
Well, first of all, I think it goes back to the question of what's your vision for an exit timeline? That's one of the first exercises I do with a client, is so that we can talk about a timeline. If they're 1 year away, 3 years away, not a lot of time, right? Versus 5, 7, 10 years. And so it gives us more of a runway to create more valuable exit options and reduce and try to avoid these pitfalls that we might step in something, right? We want to avoid stepping in something. Yeah. And so if we're clear about how much time we have and then what value we want to be creating, we can talk about, well, what are ways to, mitigate risks? What are ways to grow value? And I appreciate having both types of conversations. I think we have to. So let's just take the growth side. Let's say that our business today is worth $5 million in enterprise value. And our intention is to be 50 million by 7 years from now. Okay. Well, what projection would we have on organic growth alone to get us there? And if it's not enough, then that might point to, well, do we start to look at businesses to buy for acquisitive growth? And so strategic growth is both organic and acquisitive. And in the context of enterprise value, we start to think about things a little differently. And for an owner, what's their scorecard? They probably have lots of KPIs that they're watching and monitoring on the day-to-day side of the business. But what I see, and I'm sure you do too, is they don't know what their business is worth, and they're not setting any goals around it. So what happens if we don't set goals? We just sort of stay where we are, and we're unclear about until we're ready to sell. And then we say, oh, well, what's it worth now? But what if we had that intention? What if we had the intention to improve value, fix the things that needed to be fixed along the way, prioritize? To your question is really about prioritization, I think. And if it's causing us a lot of pain in the meantime, well, then that's probably where we need to start. What's the pebble in the shoe? Let's make our businesses better to run for us while we're running them. Don't wait to do these things till the quote unquote end. That makes no sense. This is a big misnomer. I think people think, oh, exit planning is about, getting ready for like 5 years from now. Well, no, if there's things that need to be repaired or fixed in your business, let's address them now, whether it's people, whether it's process, whether it's financials, customer related. There's always going to be issues. Time, money, people, pick all. It's a joke to say pick one. No, pick all. There's always going to be challenges to address. And just like anything, you got to prioritize.
And it's such a good lens to look at your business with, right? Even if you're not selling today, to kind of say like, okay, how would an outsider look at my business, or even invite that outsider in? Maybe not somebody who's not an actual buyer, but some who will know how a potential buyer will think and look at your business and evaluate that, and to look at your business and pinpoint where they see the gaps or the challenges they're in, because that value, it's very likely there might be little stuff where that's not the case, but 80% of it, what's value to an outsider is probably also value to you. And we all know the examples of friends or ourselves when we sell a house and we patch up things to get it sold, or our realtor says that we really should fix this. And then we're thinking, why didn't we do that whilst we lived there, right? Then we could have enjoyed it ourselves. Now I'm spending all this money getting this done. And I didn't get to enjoy it. And I think that's a very helpful analog at times to think about it, right? To go back and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't wait till, and live with some of the stuff that you don't have to live with because it's not functional. Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right. So we talked about people and we talked about money. So what's the magical third?
Well, the business is the third. The people side can be in here too. I think, personal, financial, and business. So there's some overlaps, of course, but really the business transition is a couple things. It's business readiness. Is our business ready for a potential transition? There's dimensions of that. And then there's dimensions of, is our business attractive to buyers? So we have two big buckets here, and each of them are worth spending time on. In the first one, on the readiness side, if we've done some work on understanding what risk tripwires exist, that's part of it, because we need to address those. And hey, let's just start with financials. The business financials need to look good, right? If you have a downward trend in your business for the last 3-4 years, your CAGR is negative, ouch. And it's just a tough way to approach the market to sell the business. I mean, selling the business means you got to look at your business as a buyer would and understand what they might perceive risks to be, because risks equals discount. And so there's no shortage of things that a buyer might look to discount. No. And we don't want that. We want a premium, right? Yeah. We want a premium transaction, not a discounted transaction. So I think this is a really important exercise to talk about readiness, and it could be across many different dimensions, including financials, including growth and historical results, and what do we have that is believable for future growth? What do we have in our contracts? How are they set up? What's the nature of the business? What makes our business more differentiated versus a commodity service or product? What costs us to acquire new customers? How do we acquire new customers? How are we retaining them? What's our churn look like? What are our customer satisfaction metrics? Things like our cash flow, of course, is related to financial, but it's a really important part. In AEC or engineering companies, there's other dimensions. So I have kind of a general scorecard, and then I have an AEC scorecard. Sometimes there's in different industries, different value drivers pop up, and what's important to the buyer manifests itself in different ways. And so what I look to do is take the value drivers and then kind of put a weighted average on them, and then use that in conversation around a average multiple, because if we are where we are, maybe we're in the middle, maybe we're below. If we're above, great, then we're creeping towards premium. It's like a little spectrum. You can imagine kind of a chart there, but that's one dimension. The other dimension is so that's a readiness, but also attractiveness. And I think this is very related, what's attractive to a buyer. So if we can look at both of these things together, that gives us a picture on the multiple. Why would a multiple go up or down? I get this question all the time. Yeah. And of course, there's going to be different dimensions for that business, for that industry, for the revenue size and EBITDA size of the business. And then what are the dimensions of risk or potential benefit for the buyer? And all of that gets wrapped into the art and the science of doing valuations.
Yeah, this is a moment I see all the time in my work too. The realization that what you thought you had and what the market will actually pay for, it's just not the same thing. Remember, a good business is not automatically a sellable business. And that gap, that's where the value gets lost or recovered, depending on how early you act. You have a niche that you operate in, and that you hence also have specific tools and approaches that are relevant for that niche. And I think that is very important, right? That I think there is huge value in working with somebody because these processes are time and labor intensive, right? So if you find an exit planner or somebody in our space who tells you they've done a gazillion deals, and they've been light touch on all of them, right? So you might get a certain advice, but they're not going to help you with working with somebody who is in a lane means that somebody actually will have disproportionate relevant experience. And I think that's so helpful in processing and doing the stuff that needs doing, but it's kind of just, let's get on with it and let's get it done, so that you can spend the time together on the things that are weird, different, special, particular about your business, right? And make sure you also do those things, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Laurie, before we wrap up, I wanted to a quick question. I think this is a tricky question to ask because we could spend loads of time on this. But in many exit spaces these days, people feel, whether that's right or wrong, feel that there is way more variety and option in sales buying parties, right? So there's many more different routes where you can go to. You can sell to other larger competitors or previous strategic partners, but there's also the whole VC route and other things. In reality, I don't know how many of these are truly there. Do you see a change in that? And does it feel like if there is more variation in who could potentially want to buy the business, does that really make a drastic difference in how you would go about your work?
Well, this is one of my favorite chapters of my book. So I wrote a book called the Business Transition Handbook, and chapter 6 is who should own your business after you. And I talk about the 3 kind of core categories of buyers, the different examples underneath each, and essentially giving food for thought for owners to think about fit. Just like you're hiring someone, you think about strengths, opportunities, you think about fit. And I think the same thing with thinking about a buyer. If your intention is to maintain the legacy and largely not impact the employees and processes and things of that nature, well, chances are you won't want to sell to a private equity firm. It might lead you to a sale to another type of buyer and another solution. I'm not going to sort of solve it here on the air. There's different pathways. I'm just saying at its core, if you're clear about what's important to you for the transition, it may lead you to make different decisions about buyer fit. Another example would be if you have a competitor where the sales teams just hate each other. Chances are you should not sell to that competitor because you're going to lose your whole sales team, unless that's okay in the process, but probably not. No. So again, there's just all kinds of reasons why you would choose one path versus another. So the large buckets are strategic, financial, and insiders, related buyers. And a related buyer can be family, it can be management. It's basically people that are kind of on the inside. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, I guess, which in the sense, or maybe we didn't, but I think the notion of, do we have somebody inside the company that might want to buy it and they have the capability? So that's complicated, that maybe they have the capability, but they don't want to. They don't want to take on the risk, or they don't want to take on the financial burden of having a loan, et cetera. There's any number of reasons that would point us in one direction or another. What I'm a fan of is being familiar with the different kinds of options so that you can explore them, prioritize, and then go through the process to discover whether or not one or the other options would be a fit or not. It won't come to fruition for one reason or another.
If people after tuning in today want to know more, want to find your book, want to find you, what do they do? Where do they go?
One great place to go is my website, lauriebarkman.me/follow. That gets them on the newsletter. And then all the things we talked about the podcast or for my show is called Succession Stories. The book is on that website, and they can get access to everything.
All right. So if you are driving and cannot actually read at the moment, Barkman is Barkman, and Laurie with IE. Wherever you're checking out this podcast, all this information and all the notes will also be in the show notes. So you can go back to this episode and find all that information. So we'll make sure you have it there. And Laurie, thank you so much for talking to us about exits and sharing your in-depth expertise in a specific industry, but a lot of topics that are very relevant for across the state or across the spaces in this stage, right? It's just the tip of the iceberg so far. So thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for tuning in today. I hope to have you back here at a next episode of the Business Emergency Room. Bye for now. If you've been listening to this episode and you don't know where your risks are, how a buyer would actually look at your business, you're guessing, and guessing is expensive. Do you want a clearer view of what you actually have and what it would take to make it transferable? Please reach out, because like Laurie, I'm an accredited exit planner. This is exactly the kind of work I do and have done in a very wide range of contexts. Bye now. Till next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Business Emergency Room.